Have you ever looked at your father and wondered why he never loved you? Have you ever felt abandoned, helpless, and confused without understanding why you suffered all your life? Imagine discovering that your father is not dead, not missing, but alive, rich and powerful, and the reason you endured hardship was because he chose to throw you away. This is not a story made up for entertainment. This is the real story of David Morgan, the son of Robert Morgan, a billionaire in Lagos, and the day David returned to confront the man who abandoned him changed the life of everyone forever. Morgan was not born into wealth. He grew up in Mushan, one of the most crowded and struggling neighborhoods in Lagos. His family lived in a small one-room apartment with leaking walls and a rusty roof. His parents worked tirelessly to provide for 3 children. Life was harsh. There were days when they had nothing to eat, and nights when they slept on empty stomachs. From a very young age, Robert learned that the world did not care about him, that survival depended on cleverness, courage, and patience. Every morning, Robert would wake before dawn, would help his mother carry vegetables to the market and run small errands for neighbors. Then he would walk miles to attend school in tattered shoes. He envied children who had new clothes and enough food, but instead of giving up, he promised himself that one day nobody would ever look down on him again. He vowed he would become rich and respected and never experience humiliation again. Robert was intelligent and observant. He watched wealthy people closely. He studied how they spoke, how they dressed, how others treated them. He noticed that respect followed power and money. He learned that patience, strategy, and hard work were the keys to survival. He began small by buying and selling used items at the local market. He saved every coin and avoided unnecessary spending. Slowly, he moved into real estate, buying small parcels of land and neglected parts of Lagos. People laughed at him. They said a boy from Mushin could never compete with rich men. But Robert remained patient and determined. During this time, he met Grace. She was quiet, kind, and hardworking. She worked as a secretary in a small company but carried herself with dignity. She had little money, but her confidence and calm nature impressed Robert. They became friends at first, sharing conversations and laughter over small moments. Then slowly their friendship grew into love. They got married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. Their early married life was full of struggles. They often had little to eat. They argued at times out of frustration and stress, but Grace never complained. She encouraged Robert. When his business failed, she reminded him to keep going. She believed in him even when nobody else did. Over the years, Robert's investments began to bear fruit. His small parcels of land increased in value. His business grew. He started constructing houses, selling them for profit. He made connections with influential people and slowly built his empire. In time, people began calling him King Morgan. Because of his influence and success, he had achieved wealth and respect, but one thing still eluded him: a child. Robert and Grace longed for a child. They prayed every night. They visited doctors. They tried different methods, but nothing happened. Years passed. Grace cried silently in the night. She begged God for a child. Robert also desired a son, someone to inherit his empire and continue the family name. Then one day a miracle happened. Grace discovered she was pregnant. She was afraid to believe it, but the hospital confirmed it. Robert was overjoyed. He held her in his arms and promised that their child would be safe and loved. He bought gifts and quietly celebrated at home. He believed that his legacy was finally secure. But happiness often attracts fear. Robert's life had always been about control, strategy, and careful planning. He knew the world was unpredictable. One afternoon, an old man appeared at his office. The man looked poor, but his eyes were sharp and serious. He insisted on speaking with Robert personally. Robert allowed him in, though he was wary. The old man said calmly, "Your son will bring you great blessings, but he will also bring great destruction if you are not careful. Everything you have built could be ruined." Robert became angry. He told the man to leave. He did not believe in prophecy or superstition, but the words left a small seed of fear in his heart, and he could not shake them. Night of Grace's labor arrived. Heavy rain poured over Lagos. Thunder shook the city, and the hospital lights flickered. Robert waited anxiously, pacing the corridor. Hours later, the doctor emerged and said, "Congratulations, sir. Your wife has given birth to a healthy baby boy." Robert felt a surge of relief and joy. He rushed into the room and saw Grace holding their son. She smiled and whispered, "Look at our son." Robert looked at the baby, who was small and innocent. Yet when he met the child's eyes, something stirred inside him. Not love, not joy, but unease and fear. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. The baby who was supposed to complete his happiness suddenly felt like a threat. He thought about the empire he had built, and the possibility that one child could somehow undo it. That night, Robert made the most difficult decision of his life. He called his trusted driver, Samuel. Samuel had been with him for many years and was loyal. Robert handed the baby to Samuel and said, "Quietly take him far away. You must never bring him back." Samuel was shocked. "Sir, this is your son," he said. His voice trembled. Robert did not answer. He repeated, "Take him away and do not return." Samuel begged him to reconsider, but Robert refused. Fear and paranoia had overtaken him. Samuel drove through the night with the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. He cried silently because he knew it was wrong, but he could not disobey Robert. The city lights faded behind him as he drove to a small town outside Lagos, where a poor couple, Joseph and Mary, lived. They had no children. They welcomed the baby with open hearts and named him David. Samuel left money for their care and never told them the truth. Back in Lagos, Robert lied to Grace. He told her the baby had died. Grace screamed and cried uncontrollably. Her heart broke. She mourned her son for years. Robert buried the secret and continued building his empire. He had other children later, but the emptiness from losing his first son always lingered. Meanwhile, David grew up unaware of his true identity. Joseph and Mary loved him, but life was hard. He often went to school hungry. Sometimes he worked after school to help the family. He was intelligent and hardworking and learned early that nothing in life comes without effort. He believed his life would change, though he did not know how. David never knew his real father was alive. He did not know he was the son of a billionaire. He never knew that the life of hardship he endured was because of fear and choices made by a man he had yet to meet. But one day Joseph grew sick, and on his deathbed he called David to his side. He whispered, "You are not my real son. You are the child of Robert Morgan, the billionaire in Lagos." David was stunned. He could not believe it. Felt anger, pain, betrayal, and confusion all at once. His life had been a lie. Every struggle, every hardship now took on a new meaning. He cried silently over the truth, but a spark of determination ignited inside him. From that day, David made a decision. He would go to Lagos. He would find Robert Morgan. He would demand answers. He would confront the man who destroyed his childhood. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: his life was about to change forever. David arrived in Lagos with nothing but anger and purpose. He stood before the massive building of Robert Morgan's company. He looked up at the tall windows where the man who abandoned him lived and thrived. Inside that building was the man responsible for all his pain. David felt fear and determination. He did not know how his father would react. He was no longer a helpless child. He had grown strong, smart, and resourceful, and so the story begins. David Morgan, the abandoned son, had returned. Not for forgiveness, not for love, but for answers and reckoning. The city of Lagos would soon witness a confrontation that no one could predict, and the life of Robert Morgan would never be the same again. David arrived in Lagos feeling a mixture of excitement, fear, and determination. He walked through the busy streets, observing every detail: cars honked, people shouted, motorcycles weaved through traffic. He barely noticed the heat or the crowd. His mind was focused entirely on one goal: to find Robert Morgan, the man who had destroyed his childhood and abandoned him to a life of struggle. Rented a small room in a modest neighborhood near the business district, he wanted to remain unnoticed. He knew he could not confront his father without preparation. He needed information and allies. He needed a plan. He needed to understand the empire that had been built while he suffered in silence. Every morning, David would leave his small room and walk through the city, studying Robert's company from a distance. He would sit at a cafe across the street, pretending to drink tea while observing the comings and goings of employees. Security guards and visitors, he memorized the routines, the schedules, and the behavior of Robert himself. He noticed the pride in Robert's walk, the confidence in his gestures, the way people respected and feared him. David's chest tightened with anger every day. Every time he saw the man who had abandoned him, he felt a surge of emotion ranging from rage to sorrow to determination. David also began gathering information about Robert's family. He discovered that Robert had remarried and had 2 other children. He learned that Grace had remained distant. Under Robert's control, the thought that his father had replaced him, that his mother had mourned him in vain, made David's anger flare. His emotions were a whirlwind of betrayal and longing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He could not allow emotion to ruin his plan. To gain more insight, David befriended some low-level employees at Robert's company, pretending to be an entrepreneur interested in property deals. He asked questions carefully and listened attentively. He learned about Robert's investments, projects, and vulnerabilities. He took note of details that could later help him in the confrontation. He was patient because he knew that rushing would only ruin his chance at justice. At night, David would walk along the Lagos streets reflecting on his childhood. He remembered Joseph and Mary and the sacrifices they had made to raise him. He thought about the hunger, the struggles, the nights he had cried alone. He remembered the hard work that had built his resilience. He realized that every challenge he had faced had prepared him for this moment. He was no longer the helpless child he once had been. He was now strong, determined, and ready. One afternoon, David overheard a conversation in a market between 2 men discussing a secret property deal Robert was planning. He listened carefully, noting the locations mentioned and the names of the people involved. He realized that these documents could be crucial leverage. He now had the first piece of his strategy. He had to be careful and wait for the perfect moment to act. He continued to observe Robert from a distance. Every detail mattered. The way Robert laughed with his executives, the casual way he spoke to his children, the subtle manner in which he exerted power over others. David absorbed every movement, every tone of voice. He realized that the boy abandoned long ago had grown into a man capable of matching and even outsmarting the billionaire. Also met some acquaintances of Robert who had no loyalty to him. They were intrigued by David's intelligence, demeanor, and charm. They shared small details about Robert's personality, about his temper, and his tendency to underestimate people. He stored every word in his memory. Every piece of information became part of his strategy. He knew that when the confrontation came, he needed every advantage. Weeks passed and David's plans slowly took shape. He memorized the office layout, the security patterns, the executive schedules. He studied the weaknesses in human behavior that could be exploited. He understood that patience was just as important as courage. He knew that rushing would be disastrous and that timing would be everything. One evening, while walking near the office building, David noticed Robert leaving with his driver. They stopped to talk, and Robert laughed at a joke the driver told. He looked content and unaware of the presence of his abandoned son in the shadows. Watching him, David felt a mix of emotions: anger, resentment, longing, satisfaction. He reminded himself that everything he did now needed precision. Every action had to be deliberate. At night, David would sit in his room writing down scenarios of the confrontation. He imagined Robert's reaction, the shock on his face, the disbelief of the executives, the awe of the family. He practiced his tone, his gestures, his expressions. He knew he had to control the room when the moment came. He was no longer a boy being abandoned. He was a man seeking answers and justice. David also considered his own morality. He did not want to destroy Robert completely. He wanted acknowledgement, accountability, and closure. He wanted the man who had caused him years of pain to face the consequences. He reminded himself that revenge without purpose could corrupt him. He had to remain focused on justice and truth rather than letting anger blind him. He spent weeks moving carefully through the city, maintaining a low profile. He observed everything. He took note of conversations, office movements, and minor details that could later be useful. He studied the weaknesses in people and the gaps in Robert's empire. He was meticulous because he knew one small mistake could undo all of his preparation. Finally, David managed to gain access to Robert's office building under the pretense of being a visiting entrepreneur. He was confident, polite, and charming. He presented himself as someone with potential investments and listened carefully to executives without revealing His identity, he gathered details about projects, finances, and key personnel. Every conversation added to his understanding. Every handshake and smile was part of the preparation. By now, David had developed the patience and intelligence necessary to confront Robert successfully. He knew he had built enough knowledge to create a situation where Robert could not ignore him. He envisioned a scenario where the truth would hit Robert like a thunderbolt, leaving him shocked and unable to respond. He reflected again on his childhood, the struggles and sacrifices that had shaped him. He realized that every hardship had prepared him for this confrontation. Every night he went over the plan, rehearsing words and actions. He reminded himself that the goal was justice, not mindless revenge. He had to remain in control. At all times, David now felt a sense of readiness. The boy who had been thrown away had grown into a man capable of challenging the empire that had abandoned him. He had strength, patience, intelligence, and courage. He was prepared for the confrontation that would shake not only Rabat, but also the entire city. He understood that timing, precision, and emotion would determine the outcome. The city of Lagos bustled around him, but David's focus remained sharp. He knew that soon he would face Robert Morgan face to face. That moment would not be just about confrontation. It would be a revelation, a reckoning that would expose lies, truths, and hidden secrets to the world. David was ready to reclaim his life and confront the man who had abandoned him. The morning sun poured over Lagos, casting golden light across the city streets. David woke with a mixture of fear, determination, and anticipation. Today would be the day he confronted the man who had abandoned him, the man who had stolen his childhood, and left him to suffer without reason. He dressed carefully, choosing clothes that showed confidence without arrogance. He rehearsed every word, every gesture in his mind. He reminded himself to stay calm, poised, and in control. He arrived at Robert Morgan's office building early, blending with the morning crowd. He observed the guards, the entrances, and the employees. He knew exactly where he needed to be and how to move unnoticed. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, presenting himself. As a potential investor interested in property deals, he smiled confidently and greeted the receptionist politely. She gave him directions, and he walked toward the executive floor, carefully noting every detail. Robert was in a meeting with several executives discussing a new investment deal. He spoke with authority and confidence, giving instructions and making decisions. The room was filled with respect and a slight tension, as everyone knew his power. David entered quietly, listening to the UHT conversations. He recognized Robert immediately. The man who had caused him so much pain was unaware that his first son was standing just a few feet away, observing every word, every gesture. David introduced himself to one of the junior executives. Claiming he wanted to discuss potential investments, he asked questions about project schedules and finances. He smiled and nodded, taking mental notes. He was careful not to reveal anything personal yet. Every interaction was a step toward the confrontation. He had planned every piece of information he gathered, strengthened his strategy. After a few minutes, Robert excused himself from the meeting to make a phone call. He walked past David, glancing briefly in his direction but not recognizing him. David's heart pounded as he watched the man who had abandoned him move freely, unaware that his past had returned. He reminded himself to stay calm, to wait for the perfect moment. He knew that timing would be everything. David's opportunity came when the executives left for a short break. Robert remained alone in the office. He stood near the window, reviewing some documents. David stepped forward confidently. "Excuse me, Mr. Morgan, may I have a word with you?" Robert turned, surprised at the unexpected presence of the young man he studied. David's face carefully sensing confidence but seeing nothing familiar. "I am David," David said calmly. David Morgan. Robert's eyes narrowed. "I don't know any David Morgan," he said with a puzzled tone. David smiled faintly. "You do now." He took a deep breath and continued. "I am the son you threw away, the son you abandoned at birth." Robert froze, his face turning pale. He stepped back, unable to comprehend the words, the voice, the look, the presence. It was impossible, yet undeniable. "David," Robert whispered, his voice trembling. "This cannot be. You don't understand," David said firmly. "I am the boy you left with. Samuel, to die with strangers, to suffer while you continued. Your life and comfort. You told my mother I was dead. You lied to everyone, you abandoned me, and let me struggle." Robert sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible truth he had never imagined. That David had survived or returned. David continued, "I have learned everything about your empire, your deals, your weaknesses. I know about the documents you hid, the mistakes you thought no one would ever discover. I am here not only to confront you, but to reclaim what is rightfully mine and demand justice for the life you stole." His voice was steady, filled with anger and sorrow, yet controlled. Every word struck Robert like a blow. Every detail confirmed the truth he had tried to bury. Robert looked at David, unable to speak. He had built his empire on confidence, control, and the belief that he could manipulate fate. But now standing before him was the living proof of his past mistakes. He saw the resemblance, the eyes, the features, the determination. He could not deny it. The son he abandoned had returned stronger, smarter, and ready to hold him accountable. David's revelation caused tension not only between him and Robert, but also within the entire office. When the other executives returned and witnessed the confrontation, they were stunned. They watched silently as David laid out the truth of his abandonment, his hardships, and the years of suffering he endured. They listened as he detailed every secret he had uncovered, every vulnerability he had discovered, and every injustice his father had committed. "Do you understand now?" David asked, his voice firm. "All the pain, all the struggle, all the sacrifices I made while you lived comfortably thinking I was gone." Robert could not respond. He felt shame, guilt, fear, and regret crashing over him. He realized that his choices had consequences beyond what he had imagined. He had lost control over the narrative he had thought he commanded. David then revealed the documents he had obtained about hidden deals, mismanaged investments, and corrupt practices. He placed them on the desk. "These are proof that you cannot hide from the truth anymore," he said calmly. The executives examined the papers, their faces showing shock and disbelief. They realized that the man they respected feared power, but now faced accountability from the son he had abandoned. The confrontation escalated when Robert's current family was called into the room. They watched silently as David spoke. His words were measured, yet cutting. Every phrase carried the weight of years of pain and betrayal. He spoke about his childhood, about Joseph and Mary, about the love and guidance he had received. Despite being abandoned, he revealed how he had grown strong not only in body but in mind and spirit. The twist came when David disclosed that he had secretly invested in several of Robert's rival companies. He had built a network of influence that could threaten the empire Robert had so carefully constructed. He smiled faintly. "You may have wealth, power, and influence, but I have knowledge, strategy, and the determination you never imagined," he said. Robert's face paled. The man who had once feared no one now faced the consequences of his own decisions. As the confrontation reached its peak, David took a moment to reflect on his journey. Remember the struggles, the nights he had cried, the hunger, the labor, the small victories he had achieved. He realized that all of it had prepared him for this moment. He was no longer a victim. He was the architect of his own destiny. He was ready to claim not only justice, but also closure. Robert finally spoke, his voice trembling. I never imagined you survived. I never thought you were gone." David looked at him calmly. "And that was your mistake, Father. You cannot erase the past, but you can acknowledge it. You can face the consequences or continue to hide behind your wealth." Robert nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. He had no words to counter the truth. The confrontation had stripped away all illusions of control. Emotional punch came when David forgave his father, not for Robert, but for himself. He said, "I do not forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because I will not let anger consume me. I will not let the years of pain control my life. I reclaim my strength, my dignity, and my future." Robert was left speechless. The room was heavy with emotion. The executives, the family even. The security guards felt the weight of the moment. David left the office that day, not only having confronted the man who abandoned him, but having reclaimed his life. His plan had succeeded. He had exposed the truth, revealed the betrayal, and established his own position without losing his integrity. The city of Lagos had witnessed a confrontation that would be remembered for years as a story of courage, strategy, and emotional strength. And, so the story concludes, the boy who was thrown away had returned, not only for revenge, but for justice, redemption, and empowerment. He had faced the man who abandoned him, exposed the truths hidden for years, and walked away stronger, wiser, and ready to build his own legacy. A legacy not of wealth or power, but of resilience, courage, and unshakable dignity.